You can be turning in your Bibles over to Matthew chapter 7. As we were singing today, I realized that the song Seek Ye First contained the gist of the last sermon I preached 2 weeks ago and the one I'm preaching today, and it only took 2 minutes to sing it. But I already got this thing ready, so I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. So we're going to talk today about asking and seeking and knocking. Now, if you were here at midweek, Jared shared that I kind of discovered that this passage was a little harder to work with than I thought it was going into it, and that's because of this phenomenon. What I hear may not be what you said. So I was laughing yesterday. I went to the wedding for Tyler and Katie, and I was thinking about our first year of marriage and this point on my slide. And I discovered in our first year of marriage especially that very often that what I heard was not what my wife said. Now that wasn't because I wasn't paying attention or I didn't understand the words coming out of her mouth. I just didn't know what they meant. You know, and a lot of times communication is like that. Now, we've gotten better over the years. Sometimes I still don't understand what she says, but most of the time I get what she's saying now. And I'm assuming she had the same problem with me because I can be confusing. But that happens when we read the Bible sometimes too. What we hear may not be what God is really saying. And so as I dug into this passage, I kind of found it that way, and I'll explain that more as we go along. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about our posture. Now, this is not a point in my lesson. This is going to be something we talk about in the first 3 points. And what I'm talking about when I say our posture is not stand up straight, don't slouch in your chair, keep your head, back, all that stuff. I don't know enough to tell you anything about that. I guess we have a doctor of physical therapy, so you can ask Rachel about that kind of posture. We're going to talk about our emotional and spiritual and mental posture as we go through the lesson. So here's the things we're actually going to discuss as points. The first, and you can tell looking at these that I had to work really hard to come up with these. The first one is ask. The second one, I bet you can guess before it even comes up. The second one is seek. The third one is knock. See how that works? And the last one, which may be a surprise, is a good father. And this is the point where it's really going to start to all make sense when we look at that. So let's jump in. The first point is ask. Jesus says in verse 7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be open. So, Jesus says ask. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like asking for things. I don't like asking for help. I like to be self-sufficient. I want to take care of what needs to be taken care of. I want to work it out on my own. Now, maybe I think most people feel that way. Some people are very happy to ask, but most of us prefer self-sufficiency. And so when Jesus says ask, it goes against our grain a little bit, doesn't it? So what is he trying to communicate to us? Okay, here's our first posture point. When Jesus says ask, he's talking about us having a posture of humility, a posture of reliance on God. Now, when we're at church and somebody says that, we nod. And, yes, that's right. I know that's correct. But in real life, sometimes we struggle with that idea. Why can't I just do it? Why do I have to ask? Why do I have to rely on God? And yet, that's what Jesus calls us to do. He says, ask, and it will be given to you. Now, this is where I first started realizing that I might have an issue. Because I said, okay, well, that's an easy statement. Ask, and it will be given to you. But then I started thinking about my life and the life of everybody I know. Does it work out that everything we ask for is just given to us? Boom, there it is. That's not ever been my experience, not with God or anybody else. I think that sometimes with church we have what I have deemed here Amazon Prime theology. I go on, I click, and tomorrow it's on my porch. There it is in a box on my porch, just what I asked for. Just like that. Now, I don't want to stir up envy or cause problems, but I will tell you, I've discovered from my children living somewhere else, that in a lot of places, it actually comes on the same day you order it. Not in Gainesville. In Gainesville, if you get it the next day, you're doing good. But in a lot of bigger places, you go on and say, I want that, and the same day, there it is at your house. You didn't have to leave or get out of your pajamas or anything. I mean, it's just there. And see, sometimes I think we kind of carry that into how we expect God to work. I ask, boom, I get it. I don't think it really works that way. So what is Jesus talking about? Well, this is something that I realized as I was studying this. We ask, and Jesus says, ask and it will be given to you. However, what I see in the scriptures and what I've experienced in my life is a lot of times my it may not match my ask. Okay, now I'm going to give you a scriptural example, but if you think about this in your own life, your gears will start spinning. You'll say, yeah, that's right. Look over in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Now, show of hands. How many of you, this is a vote, how many of you think that God liked the Apostle Paul? Okay, he got a pretty solid majority. I'm not sure what the others that didn't raise their hand are thinking maybe he didn't like him. You'll have to tell me later. But I think God liked the Apostle Paul. Who led Paul's studies? Who met Paul and led his studies for him to become a disciple? Jesus himself. I mean, he'd already gone back to heaven and everything, but when Paul needed to become a Christian, Jesus came down and took care of the job himself. Came to him on the Damascus Road, did a Bible study, told him where to go, got with him for 5 days. He sent Ananias to baptize him, but Jesus did the studying. God liked Paul. He was on his good list. Look at chapter 12. And we're going to pick up we got to get a little context. In the middle of verse 6. He says, therefore, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh. There's a lot of ideas about what that is. A lot of people think it was problems with his eyesight because of other references in the scriptures. But whatever it was, he had some kind of thorn in his flesh. A messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Paul's ask was, God, take away the thorn. Paul's it was grace. He asked and he received it, but they didn't match up the way Paul expected them to. That happens a lot in life. That's an important thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the 4th point. All right. The second point is seek. He says, seek and you will find. Now, why seek when I can just ask? Okay, why should I go to all that trouble? Just ask and boom, there it is. I don't have to look for anything. They're together for a reason. What does seeking indicate? Seeking involves mental and physical work. You ever lose your keys when you're on, you got to be somewhere at a certain time. And I mean, is there anything that can stress you out more than losing your keys when you're 20 minutes away from a place and it's 25 minutes to go and you can't find your keys? I mean, you start seeking your keys. And it involves your whole, it involves physical looking, but it involves your brain and your emotions and all that kind of stuff. I mean, seeking involves all of that. So that's what seeking is. What's our posture as seekers? It means I'm a diligent worker, that I'm working at something. I'm not just asking for it, I'm going after it. I'm seeking. God values work a lot. I think that we sometimes undervalue it. In the Garden of Eden, this was surprising to me the first time I discovered it. I kind of had the idea at one point in time that the reason I have to show up at a job every day and work hard and, that things have to get done at the house and all that stuff is because of sin, and so I have to deal with work because mankind is sinful, and that's part of our punishment, right? That's not true. Work existed before sin entered the world. God had mankind working in the garden to tend to it before man ever sinned. So God values work. It's a good thing. What's the lesson of the parable of the talents? We don't have time to read that, but he gives one guy 10, depending on which version you read, gives one 10 talents, one 5 talents, one talent, and he goes off and he comes back, and 2 of the 3 worked hard and gained more. What's God say to them? Well done, good and faithful servant. He's pleased with them. The one that didn't work, God's displeased with. So God values work. He expects us to be seekers. This is important. This is a kind of a preview to what we'll talk about in a minute. Don't steal your children's struggles if you're a parent. That's something that we had to learn. I think our inclination as parents is we want to jump in and make everything easy for them, right? I mean, if they cry, we want to give them whatever they're crying for. We want to give them everything they need. We want to anticipate. If there's a problem in their life, we want to run in and protect them from that problem. And some of that's good. I mean, that's part of our job as a parent. But we have to have the wisdom sometimes to let them struggle and work, or they will never develop the character they need as adults. God isn't going to steal our struggle all the time. We've got to seek. We've got to go after it. That's part of his intent. Third point, knock. This is an interesting one. We will encounter barriers. We're going to try to go places, and we're going to run into closed doors. And so we have to knock on those doors to get somewhere. I don't necessarily like running into barriers, but it happens in life pretty frequently, doesn't it? And here's the thing, it's often not the first door you knock on in life that opens. How many of you have ever gone looking for a job over the course of your life, and every single time you looked for a job, the first place you put in an application was perfect, they hired you on the spot, and you didn't have to look anymore? Has anybody ever had that experience? Okay, one person. You're like a unicorn, Margaret. The rest of us had to knock on a lot of doors. And some of us might not have even liked the one that opened. That's the way life usually works. It's not the first door that opens. We encounter barriers, but we have to knock. What's our posture in this case? Being an overcomer. We've got to have the posture of an overcomer. In Revelation chapter 3, you can go ahead and turn over there. This is kind of interesting. because of who it is. But there's two door circumstances described in Revelation chapter 3. The first one, the person knocking is Jesus. In Revelation chapter 3, in verse 20, we don't have time to read all this in context, but he says, "Here I am, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in." And so, in this case, Jesus is the knocker. He has hit a barrier, and he has to knock, and maybe the door opens and maybe it doesn't. So that's one circumstance. Go back a few verses to verse 7. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, "These are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." Jesus opens and closes doors, and we've got to knock, and the right doors will open if we trust him. Barriers test our faith. They test our perseverance. What do we do when we encounter barriers? That's important. This is a question that I ask myself a lot of times. My normal response when I get hardship or barriers or trouble in life is I feel like I'm being punished. Is God upset with me? What I've discovered over the years is most of the time hardship is steering rather than punishment. God is giving us direction. Keep a soft heart. Keep an open ear. Look for God's direction, and you'll usually appreciate the hardship later. At least that's been my experience. Okay, point number 4. And this is really where it kind of comes together. In verse 9, Jesus says, "Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him?" This is a really impressive idea because it's more different than you might think. And I think this is the real point of what Jesus is telling us. He's telling us that God is our Father. Now, you're used to that idea because you've heard it most of your spiritual life. But this was shocking to his audience to a certain extent. If you look at the New Testament versus the Old Testament on this idea of God being the Father, I went in and I put in a search, God, Father, two separate words, God and Father, and did a search. And I looked at the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, almost all the places that search comes up uses the phrase God of our fathers. Not our Father God, God of our fathers. Now, the idea is not completely foreign to the Old Testament. I don't want to give you that idea because the idea is there. Interestingly, the king, particularly David, was talked about as being of God being his father. But the people in general, while they viewed God as their father in the sense that he was the creator, this idea that I have an intimate relationship with God as my father was not something that was really a part of their day-to-day psyche. And yet Jesus talked about it that way all the time. The New Testament talks about it that way constantly. And so we're kind of used to the idea, but it's a big deal. God is our Father. That's how he relates to us. Yes, he's God. Yes, he's in charge of everything. Yes, he's ultimately going to be our judge. He may discipline us, all of those things. But even when the Bible talks about discipline, it talks about that being given to us in the context of God as our Father. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 7, it talks about God is disciplining us as sons, not just punishing us. So God is our Father. That's what Jesus is trying to get across to his audience. We get good gifts from a perfect Father. You know, those of us who are parents do our best. We try to have good judgment about when to give our children what they ask for, when to help them out, when to back down when they're trying to overcome a barrier. And we do the best we can, but God knows exactly how to do that. God's got unlimited love. He doesn't ever run out of love. He doesn't ever wonder what the right thing to do is. And there's nothing that we need or ask for or want or hope for that is outside the scope of his power to bring it about. So that being the case, why don't we get everything we want, and why doesn't everything go easy, and why doesn't it just fall into place neatly all of the time? Because God knows that's not what we need. God's always going to give us what we need. And look, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that I understand all the hard things that happen in life. There's a lot of times I scratch my head and pray and say, God, I don't understand what's going on, but I trust you. And man, in the world we live in today, that seems to happen a lot more often than it used to. Maybe it's just because I'm getting older. I don't know. But I'm not telling you I understand everything. But what I am telling you is God is a good Father, and he gives us what we need when we ask. God is a good Father, and he helps us as we seek him and seek his will and seek the right thing and seek the right path in life. And God is there to open the door when we need a door opened. We've got to look at the big picture, not just our immediate circumstance. You know, how do I judge in my life whether things are going well or things are going poorly? A lot of times I judge whether things are going well in my life by whether it's going the way that I want it to go. You know, why, with all the struggles we have, why can't I get the winning lottery ticket? I mean, does God know what I could do with $110 million? Or whatever it's, I don't even know what it's up to now. I just made that up. I mean, does he know what I could do with $110 million? Yes, he does. Unfortunately, he also knows what I probably would do with $110 million, which is why, if I bought a ticket, I would end up being $5 poorer instead of $110 million richer. God knows what's good for us. Look at the big picture, not just the immediate circumstance. Our interaction with God is relationship, not paganism. What in the world does that mean? You know, the essential difference between Christianity and paganism is Christianity is a father-child relationship with a God that loves us, that wants to spend eternity with us. Paganism is an attempt to manipulate God by offering sacrifices or whatever it is that the God supposedly needs or wants that will make him do what we want them to do. If I want rain, I do this and this, I do this dance, I offer this sacrifice, I burn this offering, and it rains. I'm doing my spiritual stuff to get a result. That's paganism. And, you know, it sometimes led to very extreme behaviors. You read about it, you know, in history, you see it in movies. But, you know, you wonder, why in the world are they doing that crazy stuff? They're trying to manipulate some God to do what they want that God to do. Boy, isn't it good that we don't ever fall into that trap. It shows up sometimes in our complaining. Well, I prayed about it. I gave more contribution this week. I served somebody. I did this. You know, I've got my list of stuff I did. Why didn't God come through? It doesn't work like that. It's a relationship with a father, not a time where we're trying to manipulate God. All right, some closing questions to ask. We've gone over the points. These aren't complicated. Are we asking? I think that most of us will spark to one of these questions or another. Are we asking God? Or are we taking care of it ourselves? Are we asking and listening when we ask? Are we seeking? You know, sometimes I think, especially after you've been a disciple for a long time, the seeking slows down. You know, I kind of know the drill. I know how to do church. I know what the Bible says about most of the important topics. And I pray and I read my Bible every day, and I just kind of take what comes along from there. I've accepted that this is life. Am I still seeking? Am I looking for God's direction? Am I digging in? Am I still working to find out what God has in store for me? Are we knocking? You know what happens when we hit that barrier, that obstacle? You know, do we sit down, stop going, say, well, the door didn't open, I guess I'm done? Or do we knock on the next door? Keep working to be an overcomer. How is our posture? You know, the postures we talked about, the humility, the hard work, the overcoming attitude. How is our posture? You know, God is worthy of our trust. I think that's what Jesus is trying to tell us in these verses. God is worthy of our trust. He loves us. He cares about us. He wants to be involved in our life and make things different. And lastly, we've got to judge outcomes with eternal perspective. Don't judge outcomes on the moment. Judge them from an eternal point of view. This is a great passage. It's got a lot to teach us. I hope that the things we've shared will help you look at it a little more deeply and get something out of it. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and have a great Sunday.